Good morning, students. So let us proceed to factors affecting equilibrium. We know what is an equilibrium constant, what are the characteristics of equilibrium constant, and today's session we will be seeing about factors affecting equilibrium. So let us see what are the factors which affect the equilibrium. The first factor which affects the equilibrium should be effect of concentration. So what happens when concentration of reactant and product is more? See, the concentration of reactants and products at equilibrium, if it is changed, then the composition of the equilibrium mixture is also changed. In order to minimize this effect of concentration change, I am repeating my first point. What is the effect of concentration? If the concentration of reactant, say for example A and B reacts to give you C and D, if reactant concentration is more, then composition of the reactant mixture, that is the equilibrium mixture, will also be changed. Why there is a change in the equilibrium mixture? Since there is a change in the reactant and product, in order to minimize this effect, the change in the composition of equilibrium mixture happens. So if the concentration of reactant is more, then my rate of forward reaction is more. Otherwise, I can tell, say for example, nitrogen and hydrogen react to give you ammonia. Once ammonia is formed, if I remove the product as soon as they form, otherwise what happen? Increased amount of product will go and inhibit the rate of reaction. This is called as feedback inhibition. That is, the product coming is going back and inhibiting its own synthesis. So what I should do? If I increase the concentration of reactant, obviously my forward reaction will proceed. But as the reactants are formed, we need to remove the reactants. We need to remove the products formed in the reaction. As a result also, your forward reaction will proceed. Otherwise, accumulation of products will pose an effect called feedback inhibition. There also the rate of forward reaction will decrease. So which are the two factors which increase the rate of forward reaction? Increased concentration of reactant increases the forward reaction. Number 2, once the product is formed, remove the products as soon as they are formed. So this also favors the forward reaction. So these are the two factors to promote forward reaction. Now which favors backward reaction? If the concentration of products is more. If the concentration of product is more, then reverse reaction or backward reactions rate also increases. So this is coming under effect of concentration. So if the concentration of reactant and product is changed, then the composition of equilibrium mixture also changes in order to minimize the effect of increase in reactant and product. If reactant concentration is more, forward reaction proceed. If the rate of product is more, if the concentration of product is more, then backward reaction proceeds. If you remove the products formed, then also rate of forward reaction proceeds. Next, moving to the effect of pressure. What happens to the effect of pressure? See, when the number of gaseous reactants is equal to the number of gaseous products, then there is no effect in pressure. So, when gaseous reactant is equal to gaseous product, when both are equal, gaseous reactant and gaseous products are equal, then there is no effect of pressure. If the number of moles of product is more than the reactant, then the pressure is low. This favors forward reaction. So, what is the condition number 1? If the number of moles of gaseous product is more than the reactant, then low pressure will be favoring the forward reaction. Now consider the opposite case, where if the number of moles of reactant is more than the product, then there will be high pressure, and high pressure is favoring your backward reaction. So what are the two cases under pressure? If reactant and the product gaseous concentration, or if the gaseous reactant and the gaseous product are equal, then there is no effect in pressure. However, if the concentration of gaseous reactant is more, then there is high pressure. This will be favoring your backward reaction. Now consider a case where the number of moles of product is more than the reactant, then low pressure will be favoring the forward reaction. Why high pressure is favoring backward reaction? Because increase in pressure increases the number of moles per unit volume. So if the number of moles per unit volume increases, then obviously the equilibrium will be shifted to the area where the number of moles of volume is less. So in which side the number of moles per unit volume is less, that side my equilibrium will be shifting. So what happens if the product number is more than the reactant? Low pressure. Low pressure will be favoring forward reaction. Now consider a second case where the gaseous reactant is more than the pressure. Here it is high pressure. So high pressure will be favoring the backward reaction. So whenever the pressure is high, what happens? Increase in pressure increases the number of moles per unit volume. As a result, the equilibrium will shift towards the area where the number of moles per unit volume is less. So this is under pressure. Now what is under temperature? Consider a reaction which is endothermic. Exothermic reaction, heat is liberated. Endothermic reaction, heat is absorbed. So in an endothermic process, increase in temperature favors the forward reaction. So consider a reaction which is happening endothermically, means where heat is absorbed, heat energy is absorbed. So in endothermic reaction, increased temperature favors forward reaction. Now in an exothermic process, decrease in temperature favors your forward reaction. Now in both the cases there is a forward reaction only, but what is the conditions which apply? Endothermic reaction, first one is endothermic process, increase in temperature, that favors forward reaction. Then in exothermic reaction, decrease in temperature favors forward reaction. Now consider an example of ammonia formation from nitrogen and hydrogen. So nitrogen and hydrogen give rise to ammonia. When ammonia's yield is more, when the product's yield is more, see, the concentration of ammonia or the yield of ammonia will be more if there is low temperature, because this is an exothermic process where heat energy is liberated. Since it is exothermic process, my low temperature is favoring more yield of ammonia. However, the rate of reaction is very slow. So I need to keep the temperature optimum between 450 to 500 degrees Celsius. Okay. So preparation of ammonia by Haber's process, that where nitrogen and hydrogen combines to give you ammonia, their yield of ammonia is more if temperature is less. Why temperature should be kept less? Because it is an exothermic process, but the rate of reaction is less, so I need to keep the temperature optimum between your 450 to 500 degrees Celsius. Now tell me other cases where the yield of ammonia will be more. Yield of ammonia will be more when you keep on removing the product formed, because the product accumulates and they themselves go on inhibit the rate of the reaction. So as soon as the ammonia is produced, we need to keep on removing them, so the rate of reaction is more, and so the yield of ammonia is also more. Now what happens to the pressure? Increased pressure favors ammonia. Why? Because the number of moles of product is less, so increased pressure is also favoring the yield of ammonia. I am just discussing you the conditions which favor the increased yield of ammonia. First condition is low temperature, because it is an exothermic process, but rate is less, so temperature is kept optimum. Second one, ammonia formed should be removed immediately as soon as it is formed, otherwise feedback inhibition will happen. In order to avoid that, ammonia formed should be removed, so as a result forward reaction proceeds. And third condition is your pressure should be kept more. Why? Because the number of moles of product formed is less, so the yield of ammonia is also more. And what is the fourth condition? If you add a catalyst called ion, the ion will be making the equilibrium to attain faster, so reaction proceeds faster, so yield of ammonia is also more. So what is your fourth condition? If you add the catalyst ion, that makes the attainment of equilibrium faster, so this also favors the increased yield of ammonia. So now I was telling you about iron is acting like a catalyst. So our fourth category which affect the equilibrium will be catalyst. So what is the role of a catalyst? A catalyst will promote both the forward reaction as well as the backward reaction, but equilibrium will be attained faster in the presence of a catalyst. So understood? So when you add a catalyst, catalyst promotes both forward reaction and the backward reaction, but equilibrium will be attained faster in the presence of a catalyst. But your catalyst does not alter the composition of the equilibrium mixture, it does not affect the value of K. So these are the three factors under catalyst. Catalyst promotes or increases both the rate of forward and the backward reaction, but equilibrium is reached faster. No change in the value of K, no change in the value of equilibrium, composition of the equilibrium mixture. So now we have seen about effect of concentration, effect of pressure, effect of temperature, effect of catalyst. We have about inert gas, the last factor which is remaining. I have just combined the yield of ammonia with all these factors. I have related catalyst, I have related temperature, I have related pressure also. So for all these cases I have given an example of production of ammonia from N2 and H2, where you have to keep your temperature low because it's an exothermic process, and the pressure should be high because the number of moles of products is also less, and here iron is acting like a catalyst and ammonia formed to be removed as soon as it is produced, otherwise feedback inhibition or end product inhibition will happen. We will be seeing the last factor now. Yes children, under the factors affecting equilibrium we have seen about concentration, temperature, pressure, catalyst. The last factor is called as inert gas. So what is the impact of inert gas on equilibrium? See, at a constant volume, inert gas will not have any effect. So whenever the volume is kept constant, my inert gas will not pose any effect. So inert gas does not have any effect in constant volume. Then what happens at constant pressure? At constant pressure, when inert gas is introduced, then there is an increase in volume. When there is an increase in volume, the number of moles per unit volume decreases. So my equilibrium will be shifting towards the position where the number of moles per unit volume is more. I am repeating, the inert gas, see, at constant volume, inert gas has no effect. But at constant pressure, when you introduce inert gas, then what happens? The number of moles per unit volume is less. So my equilibrium will be shifting to an area where the number of moles per unit volume is more. So this is the effect of inert gas. Next, I am just going to do the sum up of whatever we have done during the live session. We have seen about electrolyte, strong electrolyte, weak electrolyte, Bronsted-Lowry's Arrhenius concept, Lewis concept, then ionization of acid, ionization of bases. So till buffer I will be doing a quick recap. So what is an electrolyte? Electrolyte is a substance which dissociate to give you ions either in aqueous solution or in molten state. So what is an electrolyte? Electrolyte is a substance which dissociate to give you ions in aqueous solution or in molten state. So based on the dissociation, electrolytes are classified into strong electrolytes and weak electrolytes. What are strong electrolytes? Substances which dissociate completely to give you ions is called as strong electrolyte. Example, you have sodium chloride, you have sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, you have nitric acid, sodium nitrate. So these are the examples of strong electrolyte which dissociate completely to give you ions. So what is a weak electrolyte? A weak electrolyte cannot dissociate completely. Means there will be an equilibrium between ions and unionized molecule. So they are called as weak electrolyte. Okay. Say for example, for a strong electrolyte I can tell you NaCl completely dissociates to give me Na plus Cl minus. So completely my sodium chloride is dissociated to give me Na plus and Cl minus. But in case of weak electrolyte like acetic acid, ammonium acetate, ammonium hydroxide, etc., what happens? Your acetic acid will not dissociate completely. Instead, half will be ions and the remaining half will be unionized molecules. So there is an equilibrium between your ionized ions and unionized molecule. This in aqueous solution form an equilibrium called ionic equilibrium. So what is ionic equilibrium? Substances dissociate incompletely to give you ions and unionized molecule. There exists an equilibrium between ions and unionized molecule in aqueous solution. This mixture is called as ionic equilibrium mixture. Done. So now we know what are strong electrolytes and what are weak electrolytes we know, and what is ionic equilibrium. In ionic equilibrium, definition is exactly same as that of weak electrolyte, but you need to add a term called in aqueous solution. So in aqueous solution, my weak electrolyte dissociate incompletely to give me half ions and half unionized molecule. There is an equilibrium between these two in aqueous solution. Done. So next, moving to Arrhenius concept of acids and bases. So Arrhenius described acids as substances which produce hydrogen ion on dissociation. So what did he say? Acids are substances which dissociates completely to give you hydrogen ion or hydronium ion. So what are acids? Acids are substances which produce hydrogen ion or hydronium ion on dissociation. Example, I have an acid HX. This HX dissociates to give me H plus and X minus. What is this hydronium ion? Hydronium ion is nothing but hydrated hydrogen, where your proton will be surrounded by water molecule. H plus is a proton. When you add water to it, you will be getting H3O plus, which is nothing but hydronium ion. So what are bases? Bases are substances which give rise to hydroxyl ion. So acids produce hydrogen ion on dissociation, and bases produce hydroxyl ions on dissociation. Say for example, this is my base. In aqueous solution, my base is giving rise to OH minus. So I am giving an example for MOH. This can be sodium hydroxide or it can be potassium hydroxide. So this dissociate in the aqueous solution to give me M plus and OH minus, which is nothing but your hydroxyl ion. This can also be hydrated. So acids give rise to H plus or hydronium ion. Bases give rise to hydroxyl ions or hydrated hydroxyl ions. So this is all about your Bronsted theory, electrolyte and strong electrolyte. So let us move to, this is about your Arrhenius theory, this is about your Arrhenius theories, where we have discussed about acid and base, its example. Then we saw electrolyte, what is strong and weak electrolyte. So moving on to Bronsted theory of acids and bases and Lewis concept too. Okay children, so we have seen Arrhenius concept of acids and bases. Next, moving to Bronsted-Lowry's concept of acid and bases. What did Bronsted and Lowry said about acids and bases? Acids are substances which can donate a proton, and bases are substances which can accept a proton. This was Bronsted-Lowry's concept of acids and bases. Acid, donate a proton, base, accept a proton. Okay. Now consider an example of HCl. HCl is an acid which has donated a proton. So it will be H plus and Cl minus. What is the Cl minus called as? The Cl minus is called as a conjugate base. So now let me tell you what is conjugate acid of base and what is conjugate base of an acid. So let us come into a clear idea. Now what is the conjugate acid of a base? I have an acid HCl. This is reacting with water to give me Cl minus and H3O plus, which is nothing but your hydronium ion. What is the Cl minus? The Cl minus has donated. This Cl minus, what it has done? It has left its H and become Cl minus, and this H2O has accepted a H, right? It has accepted this H and became H3O. Now I am going to call this H3O plus as an conjugate acid, because this is formed from a base by accepting a proton. So what is a conjugate acid? A conjugate acid is formed from a base by accepting a proton. Now let me tell you what is conjugate base of an acid. Which is conjugate base here? This is the conjugate base of an acid. because this conjugate base is formed from an acid by donating a proton. So this is called as conjugate base. Okay. So we know now what is an acid which donates a proton, and what is a base which accepts a proton. Now what is conjugate acid and what is conjugate base? The first one is H3O plus. I am going to refer this as a conjugate acid because it has formed from a base by accepting a proton. And what is now your conjugate acid called? The conjugate acid is this Cl minus because this has formed from an acid by donating a proton. So chloride is the conjugate base of HCl. So we know now whenever an acid and a base react, you are going to get a conjugate acid and a conjugate base. Conjugate base is formed from an acid and conjugate acid is formed from a base. Okay, so vice versa. So this is your Bronsted-Lowry's concept of acid and bases. We know what is Arrhenius concept. Moving to the third category, Lewis acids and bases. So Lewis acids or substances which are electron deficient. Since they are electron deficient, they can accept an electron easily. Otherwise, I can tell your Lewis acid as electrophilic substances which show love towards electron because they are electron deficient. So what are Lewis acid? In short, you can remember as electrophilic substances. So Lewis acids or substances which are electron deficient, they can accept an electron easily. Example, boron trifluoride, aluminium trifluoride, etc. Now what about your Lewis base? Lewis base is just the opposite of Lewis acid, where you can say Lewis base is a substance which is electron rich. Since they are electron rich, they can donate an electron. So Lewis bases are substances which are electron rich, so they can donate an electron. Example for Lewis bases will be ammonia, where I have showed you a lone pair of electron rich in electron, and you have amines RNH2, primary amine, and secondary amine, that is R2NH, Cl minus, OH minus, then this is ether, ROR. ROR dash is nothing but your ether. So Lewis acid is electrophilic substances, electron deficient, so they accept an electron. And Lewis bases are electron rich substances, so they can donate an electron. Done. Now about ionization of acid and bases, already we have seen in live session. I think I have even derived the Ostwald dilution law. We saw the derivation of Ostwald dilution law. So why you need to ionize an acid and base? See, ionization of acid and base is going to tell you the strength or the extent of strength of your acid and base in aqueous solution. So this is the reason why an acid and a base should undergo ionization. So acid and base undergoes ionization to determine the strength. To determine the strength of extent of ionization of acid and bases, we are doing ionization of acid and bases. So based on ionization, I am going to classify acids as strong acids and weak acid. How I classify electrolytes as strong electrolyte and weak electrolyte. This is also exactly the same means. Strong acids can dissociate completely into ions, and weak acids also dissociate completely into ions. Example of strong acid include hydrochloric acid, then sulfuric acid, nitric acid. This is perchloric acid. This is chlorosulfuric acid. You know the formula for sulfuric acid as H2SO4. So I have removed H and one O. So it will be HSO3, and I have added a chlorine. So this is chlorosulfuric acid. This is fluorosulfuric acid, etc. They are strong acid. Why? Because they dissociate completely into ions. And what are weak bases? Weak bases also dissociate completely to give you ions. Example, hydroxyl ions. Here for bases I have got sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, cesium hydroxide, and barium hydroxide, etc. So we know what is Arrhenius concept of acid and bases, and we know what is Bronsted and Lowry's theory of acid and bases. We know what is conjugate acid, we know what is conjugate base. Then we saw Lewis concept of acid and bases. We saw what for ionization is done to determine the extent of strength of acid and bases. In that we have seen about strong electrolytes, strong acids, strong bases. We need to see about strong base and weak base. So children, we have seen about strong acids and strong bases. Next, moving to weak acids and weak bases. I told you strong acids and strong bases dissociate completely into ions. But weak acids and weak bases will not dissociate completely into ions. Instead, there will be ions and unionized molecules. So there is an equilibrium between ion and unionized molecule, that is called as ionic equilibrium. So what are the examples of weak acids and weak bases? So weak acids and weak bases will not ionize or will not dissociate completely, but instead they partially ionize in the aqueous solution. So there is an equilibrium between unionized and ionized molecule. So acetic acid and carbonic acid are the example of weak acid, while ammonium hydroxide, barium hydroxide, aluminium hydroxide are the examples of weak bases. How will you know whether your acid is strong or weaker? If the value of Ka is more, then stronger the acid. So you will be determining the strength of an acid and base by knowing the value of Ka and Kb. So by knowing the value of Ka and Kb, I will know whether my acid or base is stronger or weaker. If the value of Ka is more, it's a stronger acid. If the value of Kb is more, then it's a strong base. Next, moving to Ostwald dilution law. I think we have seen the derivation of this in the live session. So Ostwald dilution law states that the degree of ionization of a weak electrolyte is inversely proportional to concentration. This is your Ostwald dilution law. This alpha represents degree of ionization or it represents degree of dissociation. I am repeating one more time. What is alpha? Alpha can be a degree of association or it can be a degree of dissociation. So Ostwald dilution law states that degree of ionization of weak electrolyte is inversely proportional to concentration and it is directly proportional to the root of Ka. What is Ka? Ka is nothing but your acid dissociation constant. Now see, this is for acid I have derived, and for base it will be alpha is equal to root Kb by C. Here my Ostwald dilution law states that the degree of dissociation of a weak electrolyte is inversely proportional to concentration and directly proportional to base dissociation constant. So what is pKa? Whenever I have put a P before, then it should be a negative logarithm. What is pH? Negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration. So what is pKa? Negative logarithm of Ka. And what is pKb? Negative logarithm of Kb. If Ka is more, then pKa is less. If Ka is more, you know strong acid will be stronger. Similarly, you can write the other case. If Kb is more, then pKb should be less. Since Kb is more, it should be a stronger base. Okay. So this is the important relation between your pKa and Ka. So you need to remember, if Ka is more, acid is stronger. Kb is more, base is stronger. What is pKa? Negative logarithm of Ka. What is pKb? Negative logarithm of Kb. So if Ka is more, then pKa is less. If Kb is more, pKb should be less. So remaining, we need to see water ionization, about buffer, then about cationic anionic salts we will be doing in the next session.